Good morning. Ready to begin? Today I'd like to complement our study of Romanticism by examining more closely the life of Charles Fourier. That's four, like the number, then I-E-R. But before we study Mr. Fourier, let's review what we know about Romanticism. Who can tell me what Romanticism was and when it lasted? Yes, Mr. Styles.
Romanticism was a cultural and artistic movement in Europe. It lasted for the first quarter of the 19th century.
Very nice, Mr. Styles. Who would like to summarize the main message of Romanticism? Let's see, Miss Brown.
The main message was probably that artists should, that individuals should, use their imagination to choose the form and content of all art. The Romantics thought that the Enlightenment had kind of choked off imagination and feeling and creativity and, stifled all individual freedom.
Well put, Miss Brown. The Romantics loathed any type of rationalism. The Enlightenment had emphasized rationality and reason so much that the Romantics felt the individual had been demolished, reduced to an automated robot. It was time to liberate the soul, to break away and stand out, to reclaim individual freedom. Rousseau penned the rallying cry in the beginning of his Confessions. I am not made like any of those I have seen. I venture to believe that I am not made like any of those who are in existence. If I am not better, at least I am different. So then, it was against this backdrop that Charles Fourier appeared on the historical stage. Mr. Fourier was what Karl Marx would later dub a utopian socialist. He was one of three main utopian socialists, along with Robert Owen and Henry D. St. Simon. A utopian socialist, broadly speaking, was someone who employed socialist principles to create hypothetical versions of perfect utopias. Societies that were egalitarian or communal, in which people would live in perfect fairness and harmony. Utopian philosophers believed these kinds of societies could be achieved in the immediate future. Thus, they planted the first seeds of the early 20th century socialist movement. Monsieur Fourier was born in northeast France on April 7, 1772, and he died in Paris on October 10, 1837. He was widely regarded as the most utopian of the utopian socialists. He argued vigorously, for instance, that women should have equal rights with men, and actually coined our modern word, feminism. Also, he thought the Industrial Revolution that was then taking place in England was simply a passing phase, that mankind would move beyond industrialism to something better. As to what that something better would be, Fourier had some rather unusual ideas. He was born into a well-to-do family of cloth merchants, and after he inherited his mother's estate in 1812, he had the money and time to pursue these notions. In his four published works, Fourier laid out a vision of a future community built on emotional bonds, fueled by what he called the laws of passional attraction. Basic human passions and drives had been repressed for too long, he argued. Now, these emotions needed to be openly expressed and harnessed. Men and women would live in self-contained housing units with 1,620 members. Why 1620? Because Mr. Fourier had determined that people could be classified into 810 different psychological types. If you multiply this by 2, for men and women, you get 1,620. With such precise pairing, he was certain that the laws of passional attraction would produce ideal, harmonious relationships. Many of Fourier's ideas, to be frank, were perfect nonsense. He projected that his new world would last for 80,000 years, the last 8,000 of these in an era of perfect harmony. In this period, he predicted, among other things, that 6 moons would orbit the Earth, and that the seas would become oceans of lemonade. But sprinkled amidst his nonsense were enough kernels of fresh thought to qualify Fourier as an instrumental influence on later socialist thinkers such as Marx and Engels. Many think the most valuable of these kernels was Fourier's idea that work, especially heavy manual labor, could be turned into play, something deeply satisfying both mentally and physically. That was probably the one vision of Fourier's that most captivated later socialist thinkers. Ah, Michelle. I thought I'd find you here.
Hello, Henry. Yes, I'm afraid the smoker's lounge is about the only place I can relax in around here. Can I do something for you, or are you just slumming?
Well, I was wondering. You teach the afternoon section of modern social systems, don't you?
Yes, that's me. Why?
Have you got a student in there by the name of Steiger, Sarah Steiger?
Sarah? Yes, you know her?
I sure do. She's in my undergrad psychology seminar. She's beginning to be a real problem for the class, and I was just wondering how you were handling her. Or is she okay in your class?
Okay, yes. Well, not really, but she's just eager to learn, I think, don't you?
You think so? That's why she never stops asking questions? I'll tell you what I think. I think she already knows the answers before she asks. Or she's just asking for the sake of asking.
Huh? Why's that?
Well, half the time she wants to know about something we've already discussed in some detail, and half the time she has questions that are off topic or, well, just mindless.
I suppose you could be right about that. Sarah can certainly be irritating sometimes. Sometimes I feel I'm cheating the rest of the students by spending so much time explaining things to her.
Exactly, and I can see them all rolling their eyes. The rest of my class is a little irritated with her, too.
Maybe we should just give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she's just trying too hard, I don't know, to learn maybe, or maybe just to make an impression on us. I don't know what her motives could be.
Yeah, well, she's making an impression all right, but it isn't a good one. Any ideas? Proactive ones, I mean?
Well, I guess we should have a talk with her.
A talk? A private one, you mean?
Yeah, it's either that or just give her the cold shoulder.
I'm afraid I've already been giving her a bit of that. I thought maybe she'd take the hint and sit back, listen and take notes for a change.
She doesn't take any notes? She does in my class, voluminous ones.
Are you sure, Michelle?
Sure, I'm sure. She's always scribbling away.
But have you seen Sarah's notes?
Well, no, but...
I have. I took a peek over her shoulder a couple of times. She's a doodler.
A what? She doodles?
All over her notebook. I don't think she's keeping any kind of notes or paying attention at all to what I'm saying or what anyone else says in class. She's just daydreaming or dreaming up something irrelevant to inquire into. This morning, we'd been talking about Jung's theory of archetypes, and she suddenly blurted out, "What's an archetype?" Well, we'd been discussing archetypes for half an hour by then, and it was like she just realized she'd heard a strange word when the conversation was almost over.
Heh, that's Sarah all right. Okay then, who's going to talk to her, you or me? Okay. I'll see if I can get her to come in and talk to me later this week. I'll be seeing her in class tomorrow afternoon, I guess. Maybe I can get her to settle down a little. She doodles.
Yes, pretty good really. Complex architectural rococo things. Maybe she could go to art school instead of majoring in sociology.
That's Sarah's major, is it?
I think so. I think she mentioned that once. Anyway, yes, if you could have a little talk with her, that would be great. And let me know what happens, what you find out, will you?
Of course. I'll let you know how it goes.
Thanks, Michelle, very much. I owe you one. Now I've got to run before all this secondhand smoke does me in.
Haha, now don't start that.
All right, but you know you should really try to.
Henry.
Okay, thanks. See you.
Talk to you soon.
Now, we're all familiar, I think, with the United Nations organization, and we're very accustomed to a world divided into nations. But many of you may not realize how recent the idea of the nation-state really is. Most of the history of civilization's been a history of much smaller units, from primitive tribes to Greek city-states, and later much of the larger units usually called empires. The concept of a political and cultural nation as we know it today didn't appear until near the end of the 18th century, at the time of the French and American revolutions. Let's look at a couple of terms first, just to make them clear. Strictly speaking, a nation is a cultural concept, a group of people in a particular area who are usually defined as sharing a common history, common traditions, the same language or ethnic origin, etc. A state, on the other hand, is a political concept. It's a political unit, an administrative unit, a territory controlled by a government. So what we're talking about here, nation-states, what we often call countries, are those areas where these two concepts, nation and state, are roughly congruent, where they coincide in time and space. And this is the basic structure, the infrastructure of civilization of the world we see today, the basis upon which treaties are signed, on which wars are fought, and for which people often die. One historian has said that a nation-state is an imaginary community because the citizens of even the smallest nation-state will never meet all their fellow citizens, or even hear about them. Yet in each citizen's mind is some image of oneness, of unity with his fellows. Some think that this image is the direct result of the development of printing and the popular press, which likewise expanded in the 18th century, and which in its language and its audience has helped define these national communities. Well, imagined or not, nation-states are very real to us today. In fact, they seem like the only natural form for society in spite of their very recent origins, don't they? But at that same time, they seem to be the cause of so much turmoil in our world. Wars, nuclear standoffs, ideological conflicts, conflicts over resources and markets. The list seems endless. So maybe we'd better take a more careful look at the factors that seem to contribute to the idea of nation-statehood. First, geography is an obvious factor. Countries like Japan and New Zealand have very clear boundaries, and their physical isolation makes these nations very homogeneous. However, geography is often irrelevant. Ireland and Cyprus are certainly very strong divided islands, and many countries, notably African countries, have boundaries that have nothing to do with natural features or ethnicity or anything else. They are simply straight lines drawn in the last century by former colonial powers. And then there's language, which is also used as a rationale for nationhood. The United States and Germany and France are all large, successful states that are defined mostly by language. But on one hand, many international boundaries cut directly across language lines, as with Belgium and the Netherlands, while on the other hand, countries like South Africa and India include speakers of many different languages. And a common ethnicity, that is, a common genetic background and a common cultural heritage, have certainly helped determine the identity of many nation-states. Nevertheless, many larger countries, like China, are composed of many ethnicities, while other ethnic groups, like the Kurds, for instance, are conspicuously stateless. Finally, one more major determinant is religion. Religion has also played a big part in defining nations: Catholic Ireland, Buddhist Nepal, and of course Jewish Israel. But again, many states suffer internal strife, violent conflict, on account of religious differences, Iraq being the most obvious current example. So it should be clear to you that none of these factors are foolproof definers of the nation-state. In fact, they often complicate the situation. Would it then be reasonable, therefore, if we divided Iraq, for instance, into 3 nations, into Sunni and Shiite and Kurdish nations? Would that solve many of their problems? Probably not. Drawing lines usually just creates new problems. Minorities become smaller minorities. Surrounding states endure altered confrontations. The fracturing of other states is encouraged, and redrawing a state's boundaries wrongly suggests that conflicts, ethnic and religious and linguistic conflicts, can be decided by dividing peoples, when the real solution probably lies in trying to unite them, lies in recognizing individual rights, in devolving power to the local level, and in a sort of pan-nationalism that focuses on maximizing cooperation among nation-states, and in that way minimizing the impact of hard boundaries poorly defined by any factor. This is what is happening so successfully with the European Union, the organization which we'll be taking a closer look at now.